Every woolen sweater begins somewhere very different from the clothing store. It begins with a simple animal, a sheep. And when millions of sheep are producing wool, the amount of fiber becomes enormous.
But this soft-looking wool is still far from becoming clothing.
Before it can become yarn, fabric, or a sweater, the wool has to be harvested.
And that's where the transformation begins.
A skilled shearer carefully removes the fleece. Layer by layer, the thick coat begins to come away.
What looks like one giant coat is actually thousands of natural fibers packed together.
And now, the wool has officially entered its journey toward becoming clothing.
But fresh from the sheep, this wool is nowhere near ready for a factory. Workers collect the fleece and prepare it for the next stage.
Now the wool can finally be inspected.
Not every part of the fleece is suitable for making clothing.
Anything unwanted is separated before the valuable wool continues.
Different batches can be separated according to their quality and characteristics.
The goal is simple. Find the wool that can produce the best final material. Longer and stronger fibers can be especially valuable for textile production. After sorting, the wool is ready to be collected in huge quantities. And this is where a few sheep's wool becomes part of a much bigger operation. Loose wool takes up a huge amount of space, so the factory needs a better way to move it. Powerful machines squeeze the wool into compact bales. The soft fleece is suddenly packed into an incredibly dense block. Now the wool can be stored and transported much more efficiently. Each bale is secured so it can survive the journey ahead.
And suddenly, the scale becomes much easier to understand.
This is no longer a small farm operation. This is the beginning of a massive industrial supply chain. And now, the wool is ready to leave the farm. One bale at a time, the raw material begins its journey to the factory.
The destination is a facility built to handle wool on a completely different scale.
Massive bales are moved toward the transport trucks. Inside, the bales are packed tightly together. One truck can carry an enormous amount of raw wool. But underneath all that compression is the same natural fiber that came from the sheep.
Before the journey begins, everything is checked one final time.
The wool is packed, secured, and ready to move. Now the transformation moves from the farm to the factory. Truck after truck carries raw wool toward the next stage. And inside these trailers are the raw materials for thousands of future garments. After the journey, the wool finally reaches the industrial world.
This is where the real mass production transformation begins.
Behind these walls, raw wool will begin its biggest transformation yet.
The first shipment arrives.
The doors open and the raw material enters the production facility.
From here, every step is designed to move enormous quantities efficiently.
The wool has reached its destination.
Workers prepare to unload the first massive shipment.
And suddenly, the scale becomes impossible to miss. Inside is thousands of pounds of raw material, waiting to be transformed. The unloading begins. Multiple machines work at the same time to keep the factory moving. Multiple machines work at the same time to keep the factory moving. And this is only the raw material waiting to be processed.
Every bale represents wool collected from sheep farms before it ever reaches this building.
Each shipment is identified and prepared for processing. The incoming material is weighed before entering production.
The factory keeps track of every batch entering the facility.
But the factory still hasn't touched the wool itself.
Now the wool is finally ready to enter the production line.
And this is where the raw material meets the machines. The tightly compressed bale is opened.
Once released, the wool springs back into a huge, fluffy mass. Up close, you can see why this material still has a long way to go. Hidden inside are bits of dirt, grass, dust, and natural grease.
The factory has to separate the useful fiber from everything that doesn't belong.
The first loads are fed into the processing system.
And now the wool begins moving continuously through the factory. What began as fleece on a sheep is now entering a carefully controlled production process. But before this wool can become yarn, the factory has one major problem to solve. It has to deal with everything that came along with the wool.
Tiny pieces of grass can become trapped inside the fleece.
Dust and dirt can hide deep inside the fibers.
And the wool naturally contains grease that must be removed during cleaning. The difference between raw wool and finished wool will soon become dramatic.
But getting from one side to the other takes more than simply washing it once. The wool continues forward. And the deeper it goes, the bigger the transformation becomes.
Workers watch the process carefully as thousands of pounds move through the system.
The raw wool has reached the point of no return. Now the factory is ready to remove what doesn't belong. The tangled fleece disappears inside. Inside, the first stage of cleaning begins. Soon, the wool will meet one of the most important parts of the entire process. The factory uses controlled washing to remove much of the unwanted material.
The difference becomes visible almost immediately. And for the first time, the raw fleece starts to look like something that could become clothing. From dirty and tangled to clean and ready for the next transformation.
But cleaning is only the beginning. Because even after all that cleaning, the fibers are still tangled together.
Clean doesn't mean ready.
The next challenge is to turn these tangled fibers into an organized material.
And that's where one of the most fascinating machines in the factory takes over.
The wool enters as a soft, tangled mass. The chaotic fleece is slowly becoming something the factory can actually work with. And this happens again and again at an enormous industrial scale. Every stage brings the wool one step closer to becoming clothing.
Soon, these loose fibers will become something completely different.
The fibers are finally clean and organized. But they're still not yarn. And for the first time, the wool begins to look like the thread we recognize. The loose fibers are pulled together and gradually formed into a continuous strand.
But this isn't happening once. It's happening hundreds of times across the factory floor.
Tiny fibers are being brought together until they become a stronger, usable yarn.
And at this scale, the factory can produce enormous amounts of yarn every day.
The newly formed yarn is carefully wound and prepared for its next transformation.
The messy fleece we saw at the beginning has now become something completely different.
The wool has finally become yarn. Now, that yarn must become fabric.
Thousands of these yarn strands are prepared for the next stage.
The yarn is carefully guided into the machines that will turn it into cloth.
And this is where individual strands begin joining together.
Little by little, the yarn becomes a continuous piece of cloth.
What was once a single thread is now becoming something you can actually wear.
The familiar softness of wool clothing is beginning to appear. And the fabric keeps coming, meter after meter. Across the factory, hundreds of machines can work at the same time. At this scale, enormous amounts of cloth can be produced continuously. At this scale, enormous amounts of cloth can be produced continuously.
Any visible problem has to be found before the fabric moves forward.
Next, the fabric is cleaned and prepared for its final look and feel. The material is carefully treated so it reaches the right texture. After washing, the fabric is dried and prepared for finishing. This is where the fabric starts gaining the feel that people expect from quality wool clothing. This is where the fabric starts gaining the feel that people expect from quality wool clothing. Now the material finally looks ready to become clothing. But most clothing doesn't stay the natural color of the wool.
So the fabric is given the colors people want to wear.
A simple piece of natural wool can now become almost any color.
A simple piece of natural wool can now become almost any color.
The colored fabric is dried and prepared for cutting.
The finished fabric is inspected one more time.
Now the wool has completed another major transformation.
But we're still not looking at clothes yet.
The finished fabric now moves to the garment line.
This is where giant rolls of fabric will become thousands of individual clothing pieces.
The fabric is spread across the cutting table. Every section is carefully planned so the fabric can be used efficiently.
Then the machine begins cutting the pieces that will become the garment. Then the machine begins cutting the pieces that will become the garment.
Sleeves are separated from the body pieces.
Even the smallest pieces are prepared for assembly. Now the separate pieces finally begin coming together. Now the separate pieces finally begin coming together.
Sleeves are attached, seams are joined, and the shape begins to appear.
The collar is added, bringing the garment closer to its final form.
And now, after all those transformations, the original sheep wool is finally starting to look like clothing. And that's how millions of pounds of sheep wool are transformed into the clothes we wear. From a sheep in the field to a finished garment in the factories, every piece has gone through an incredible transformation. What looks like a simple wool sweater is actually the result of an enormous industrial process.
If you enjoyed seeing how everyday products are made, subscribe to watch more fascinating factory documentaries and discover the incredible.
Subscribe now, and let's discover what gets made inside the world's most fascinating factories.